I have a question for you. I want you to ask yourself, do you know why you have your job? Like, in a real way, like to the exact method that you were chosen. Do you know why you have your job? Why were you hired? What was the reason that an HR employee looked at you and said, you have the job? What was the reason your boss called you and told you why you got the job over everybody else? What was the reason? I would venture to say that most of you, as someone who's had multiple jobs in various industries, most of you don't know exactly why you have the job, and that's normal. Most of you don't know to the exact reason why your boss picked you over all the other applicants, over all the other people that they interviewed. Now, I can think of one situation where my boss told me why I was hired, and it was because, for one, I interviewed really well. These are his words. And quite literally, everybody else was disastrous. And he even gave me one of the horror stories as to why one particular person was so disastrous. So I really stood out of all the applicants. Hence, I got the job and I stayed there for a number of years. But that's one of very few circumstances that an employer will openly tell you in an honest way why you have the job. Not too many employers are that honest. So if for your own employment, you probably don't know to the exact reason why you were hired, how exactly do you know why somebody else got hired? And what I've been seeing a lot is a dialogue about suspicion over why someone was chosen for a particular job over somebody else. And at the same time, there's a dialogue about a policy put in place that's advocating for choosing people over other people based off of something they have no control over, whether it be their sex, their race, religion, whatever. And so I want to talk about both sides of it. I want to talk about the policy through diversity, equity, and inclusion that chooses one person over others based off of what they look like, versus the imposition of saying someone was definitely chosen because of that policy, which I believe are two separate things. So I'm going to be 100% honest with you. I'm not in favor of DEI, and I'll tell you the reasons why. I believe that DEI is discrimination, and part of civil rights law and even instituting equal opportunity employment was to get rid of discrimination for employment. So it doesn't say in this law that you cannot discriminate just against Black people, or just against racial minorities, or just against women. It says you cannot discriminate against anybody, no matter their race, sex, ethnicity, religion, you name it. There is zero reason why you're allowed to discriminate against other people in favor of somebody else. And the way I see it is that if such a policy is put into practice, then we rationalize that policy being put into practice. What's it to keep from going after the same people that are getting the advantages today in the future? Like, let's just say hypothetically, I go to a company, they like me, they want to hire me, they really want to hire me because I'm Black. Let's just go for that. Well, what's to say that in the future they say, listen, we hired way too many Black people, and our numbers are looking really skewed. We need to start hiring other people. We need to not hire Black people. Let's say we need to hire more Hispanics. That's still wrong, right? And that's a possibility that something like that can happen. Decades ago, we got rid of race-based discrimination for employment through law. And now we have a resurgence of race-based discrimination despite the law. And so from my principal stance, I don't think anybody should be discriminated against based off of something they have no control over. You know, I have no control over me being a man, me being black. I was born this way. This is who I am, and I'm fine with that. But I don't think that should be a deciding factor with finding a job. Do I fit the credentials, that they're looking for? Do I have the experience? These are all things I have control over, but I have no control over what race I am. Same goes for a white guy. He has no control over that he was born white or that he's a man. He has no control over that. So it's an unfair imposition that you want to say that somebody can or can't have a job because of something they have zero control over. So from a principle standpoint, I am not in favor of DEI when it comes to employment practices. I think it is wrong, I think it's unethical, and it is actually unlawful. You're not supposed to do this. So, with that being stated, I want to dive a little bit further into DEI and are we overblowing DEI a smidge? So, as I've said, I am not in favor of DEI. However, I think there's been a reaction to the existence of a particular policy. And I don't think people understand just because something exists doesn't mean it's being implemented. It sounds weird, but just because something exists does not mean it's being implemented 100% of the time. Doesn't mean it. So, just because something exists, like race-based preferential treatment, doesn't mean that the person who is being hired is unqualified. So, I'm going to say this again. Just because a company sees a black person, even though they want to fill their racial quota, but it doesn't mean that that black person is unqualified. These are separate things altogether. So, how did we get here as far as thinking that being chosen for something that you have no control over equals to being unqualified? I think we got here because it's a reaction. The progressive left, especially the anti-racists, push for diversity, equity, and inclusion in corporate America. Statistically, you can see this. The trends show it. Post George Floyd, this was the push. It was a racial reckoning that everybody felt they needed to be a part of to remedy, right? Because George Floyd's death equals all black people are being oppressed, and things are far worse than we realized. So DEI was the corporate method to have some sort of social change, right? It was them realizing, we've been doing it all wrong in corporate America. And these poor black people who are being disenfranchised, we need to uplift them, right? So it's corporate saviorism is what it actually is. It is the belief that whether it be a black person, a woman, Hispanic, you name it, this particular person, I need to give them preferential treatment because they're incapable of doing it themselves. And actually, it's an indictment on the employer to think that they can't, or actually I should say, it's an indictment on the employer because they're admitting that they wouldn't hire somebody unless being suggested that they should hire someone. So either the employer is admitting that they're racist or sexist, I don't know. You pick and choose however you want to interpret it. But it's not a good look, in my opinion. So the reaction to choosing someone because you feel like they need a leg up in this institutionalized saviorism that exists in corporate America started becoming prevalent. So then, of course, the reaction to it, to an unlawful act, is to say this is wrong. It is wrong that you choose somebody based off of their skin color, no matter if you think they're disenfranchised or not. It is wrong. it is ethically wrong, and it's actually illegal to do so. So you have the action and you have the reaction. When the action gets stronger, the reaction always becomes stronger, right? Equal and opposite reaction. And so as the push to employ, the narratives to employ, when progressive left infect our society with constant narrative making about we must do more, activism on behalf of Black Americans and all racial minorities and everybody who's oppressed and so on and so forth. So that means that somebody's the oppressor. Well, we know who the oppressor is, right? So as strong as we've made racial minorities like myself appear to be the victims and always oppressed, it is as strong as we've made people who are not racial minorities and men as the oppressors. And it's not fair either way. It is not fair to label me as a victim just because of how I look, or see me as incapable because of the way I look. It is equally unfair to see someone who is, let's say, a white man, to say that his existence is oppressive to others, despite him doing nothing to actually oppress anyone. And this is all leftist jargon. You know, oppress, oppressor. There's always good versus evil. It comes in many forms. But oppress versus oppressor, it's the dynamic between the two. And it's always invisible systems and so on and so forth. So that is how we ultimately get here some years later, after the massive push for DEI in corporations, which, like I said, prior to George Floyd, corporations saw diversity, equity, inclusion as some sort of unprovable thing, as a niche product to put into your corporate environment. And we all know that corporations are about the bottom line. We want to see proof as to how does this actually benefit our company? Well, how do you prove that DEI is actually beneficial to your company? What numbers can you show to say that this is improving things? Well, you can't, right? It's all off of faith, it's belief. It's a religious dogma within a corporate environment. They just don't call it that. And to be clear, some environments are very dogmatic when it comes to DEI. Some environments are just doing it because everybody else is. I've seen environments where it's lukewarm DEI. It's just saying the thing that they feel that needs to be said because everybody else is saying it. But how strong do they believe in it? Not that strong. I feel like DEI is just as strong as the people who work in it. And not every company has a DEI department. Sometimes they infuse HR with DEI-oriented jargon and paperwork and bureaucratic nonsense. So there are in-betweens when it comes to DEI. Advocating for diversity is kind of just what does that even mean, advocating for diversity? Does it mean much? I don't know. But in some cases, how these non-ideological companies kind of see DEI as, it's not a bad thing to say we would like a diverse environment. That's basically it. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to say we're inclusive to all different types of people. It's not really a bad thing to say. It is a bad thing when you're structuring your hiring specifically to exclude others so you can manufacture an environment that looks a particular way that you want. Same way if there's a white business owner that says, I only trust white people, so let's construct an environment of like-minded white people because that's what I feel is inclusive. It would still be just as bad. But being open to hiring people, to me, sounds redundant because they should have already been open to hiring people, right? That's why I said it feels kind of like an admission that they weren't open to hiring people of different backgrounds and racial makeup. So with all that being said, just because DEI exists doesn't mean it's always being implemented. And just because DEI exists doesn't always mean that the person who is being hired, even for racial reasons or gender reasons or whatever, doesn't mean that that person is unqualified to do so. Now, what ends up happening is when you say something like this publicly, you get into a match of who is more qualified. But what does that actually mean, right? Who is more qualified? Because resume isn't everything, right? I've worked in environments where I have less credentials, more experience than others, and I do just as good a job or better. There's somebody who's been working longer than I have in the particular field, yet I'm able to keep up with them. Aptitude can't be put on a resume. Competency can't be put on a resume. Likability can't be put on a resume. Someone that you actually want to be around, someone who is positive, someone who speaks well, who communicates well. You can write, I communicate well on a resume, but it doesn't mean anything. These are things that are not measurable on a piece of paper. These are things that are measurable in person, right? This is why you have an in-person interview. This is why they ask you particular questions, because they want to see what your mindset is. These are very, very important aspects of hiring. So what exactly does qualified even mean if you go down that rabbit hole? Does it mean that, well, this white person has the same exact credentials as this black person, yet they chose the black person over the white person? One, how do you even know that? Two, these are all assumptions. Three, the paper, the resume means nothing. Absolutely nothing. You know how many people make up all types of stuff on their resume to look good? The resume is a door opener, but an actual in-person interview is a different story. So that, to me, how am I supposed to judge if someone is qualified or not for a particular job? I have zero idea. I don't even know why I got all of my jobs. You likely don't know either. But see, the whole point of all of this is to create skepticism. The whole point of the leftist dogma of DEI, the backhanded point that is encouraged, is skepticism. It says the people who are not true believers of DEI, you should become skeptical of every person who is not white. And when you become skeptical, guess what? You are now racially aware. See, the objective of the far left was to make you racially aware. It wasn't to make you say, I agree, anti-racism is the way. That's not the point. See, the issue was always to make you racially aware. The issue was saying that colorblindness is naive. You should always be racially aware of what's going on around you. The issue was that you tried your best to treat people equally. You tried your best to treat people like you want to be treated. That's my personal philosophy, but that is the problem. But if I can change your environment and make you skeptical of the very people that you thought you were treating equal, you've become racially aware. See, you become more aware that there are black pilots flying an airplane, whereas a few years ago, you wouldn't have cared. Or if you had noticed, you'd be like, oh, you don't see that often, a black pilot. But what ends up happening is the counter reaction to we must have more diversity is everyone here must be here for diverse reasons. And that's an illogical reaction. And so now when you start to become skeptical and you start to see this illogical reaction, you are now searching for DEI and everyone and everything, which is an activity of racial awareness. And I don't think many who are against DEI, whether they're on the political right, center left, whatever, I don't think they understand that this is part of, and this is part of what they want. See, they want you to see me in a prominent position and say, he's the black guy who got the turn. They want you to look at other black people and say, someone gave them a leg up. Oh, I see. They needed another black voice. They needed another black thing. That's why they're there. That's what they want you to see. They want you to treat me differently, even if you agree with me. They want you to always notice this. That's it. You don't have to agree with the leftist dogma. They just want you racially aware, because you're just as useful as an enemy as you are a friend. Because enemies are always examples as to why they can recruit people to become their friends. See, we need anti-racism because see this right-winger over here who says that any black pilot must be here because of DEI? That's why we need anti-racism. Your racial awareness creates more recruits for them. It gives them validation as to why we need this. Proof that we must have more anti-racism. You see these racist right-wingers who are doing these things? Which, by the way, right-winger to them is anybody who is not the anti-racist. So it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, doesn't matter if you're a Republican, doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative. Anybody who is not an anti-racist, progressive leftist is to the right of them. So you're a right-winger when I say this. But that's the whole point. The whole point is to make you racially aware. The whole point is to create skepticism. The whole point is to have you see race in everything that you do. The whole point is to make sure that you think that America is not the America you once knew. The whole point is to make you think that they're implementing this far more than it actually is happening. So we'll use black pilots. Let me ask you, do you think that you can just invent a pilot, even if you really want to? You can't, right? There's a whole process that's put into place. They can't just make up black pilots. It's not a thing. They can't go to Harlem and just take out random black people and say, you want to be a pilot? And just put them at the control of a plane. You can't do it. It's not a thing. Even if they want that to be a thing, it's not a thing. We have FAA regulations, right? You literally have to have a certain amount of hours in play before you can even fly an airplane. It's not a thing. Now, does that mean that if a black pilot who happens to exist, which is a rarity, and they get one in an interviewing room and they choose one over someone who is white, is that possible? Sure, that's possible. But guess what? I have no idea, and neither do you. And that's the whole issue. You're skeptical now. See, we get into these back and forth over, well, this person has more skill set of flying an airplane. And by the way, this conversation is happening with people who don't fly airplanes. You know, talking about who's more qualified and looking at articles talking about how someone else was interpreting how they were in training, which is all subjective. So then we go down the rabbit hole of what is qualified. Do you check and see if someone who is white is qualified? Why the assumption that someone is white and gets hired is qualified, but someone who is black and gets hired is not qualified because of the existence of DEI? Do you see the conundrum that you create? You're now racially aware. This entire conversation is about making you racially aware. It's to confuse you, to confuse everybody. And it's actually to make you to become the very thing that they claim that you are, right? Because if I was to simplify what some people say, that as soon as I see a black person flying an airplane, I gotta wonder if they're qualified, that doesn't sound very cool. That doesn't sound very colorblind. That sounds very racially aware, right? And imagine if I take that quote, and I'm some anti-racist, I take that quote, I run it and see? They see a black person and they think unqualified. That's how propaganda works. So even if you're just saying it, let's say, in a good faith way, you didn't mean to have it sound the way it sounded, well, guess what? You're still racially aware. They still won. This is a tit for tat type of thing that happens when you go back and forth with leftists. The issue is not the issue. The issue is the revolution. This is part of the revolution. The issue isn't that there aren't enough black pilots, because you know why it's not the issue? Because they say there's not enough black everything. Probably not enough black school bus drivers and not enough black strippers or whatever. There's not enough black this. But it's the way that they're able to change the system. It's the way they're able to shift society. Because there aren't enough of X, we must now change the system, revolutionize the system, so that it creates another opportunity for X to exist. This is communist thinking. The whole point is to make you racially aware, so you are an enemy, and you give validation as to why we should change the system. That's it. You are just as good as an enemy, even as a friend. They'll take either. Because an enemy will drive people into the friend's arms. And that's what they want. So you have to ask yourself, are you fulfilling the objectives of communists? Are you helping to push forward change, even though there doesn't need to be change? Go and look up statistics as far as pilots based off of demographics. DEI's been in this whole thing for a few years. Doesn't seem to be changing that much. Why? Because you can't invent pilots that don't exist. It's as simple as that. You still have to get licensed. You still have to go through this entire process. One thing I learned about progressives is that they say a lot. They say they really want to do things. But do they do it? Well, they do something. But they don't produce the outcomes that they claimed that they want. It's not about getting more black pilots. It's not about that. It's about the revolution. It's about changing the system. And I keep watching people fall for this trap. So this conversation about DEI is not really about black pilots. It's not about being less racist. It's about falling for the trap. It's about being contributors to the revolution that they're trying to aspire to have. America doesn't need a revolution. They want it to happen, but we don't need it to happen. Most of us agree that there are problems. Can things be better? Absolutely, because no one's perfect, no society is perfect. There are always going to be problems. However, what they're advocating for is the tearing down of what we call normal. to give the illusion that something is wrong. Not enough black air pilots. Something is wrong. There's not enough pilots. Got to tear the whole thing down. We got to get in these positions of power and change everything. That's what they do. But with the change that they're making isn't necessarily to put another black pilot who might have been there anyways. That's a facade. The issue is getting into positions of power, validating their actions by making sure that there is always an enemy who is fighting them for this change. And when the enemy slips, they use it as propaganda to move forward. And for the naysayers who are around them, who are skeptical of the communist change that's coming, well, man, they must be onto something, because these crazy people over here, they sound really racist. Maybe anti-racism is a thing that we need to start taking hold of. Maybe diversity, equity, inclusion is needed, right? This is how propaganda works. The issue is never the issue. The issue is revolution. Everything is about the revolution for them. So you have to ask yourself, where do you fall in line with this? Are you contributing to the dogma? Are you contributing to the communist movement? Inadvertently. I'll leave by saying this. It is not about pilots. It's not about more black faces, more female faces, or more this, more that. This is all a facade. You can make horrendous things look nice. It is about giving validation for discrimination. It is about changing the fabric of our society. Today, it's about uplifting, quote unquote, uplifting black people on behest of downgrading white people, right? But I didn't ask for that. Most black people didn't ask for that. We just want a fair shake like everybody else. But they don't need our permission to do so. They just have to make sure that you believe that they have our permission. That's the trick. So I might be considered a coon for not going along with leftist dogma, a racial betrayer to black people for saying that we are capable of doing good by ourselves without the help of some benevolent figure or the government giving us assistance. And I'm fine with that. But I'll be those things before I accept that narrative that the only way that I can get ahead in life is by somebody pitying me. I'm cool with that, and you should be too. So don't fall for the trap. It is not about pilots. It's not about hiring. It's not about that. These are all facades. Some people are going to get hurt in the process. And some of it is exaggeration from both sides. But the objective is the revolution. Confusion helps to bring on the revolution. But you have to become racially aware for the confusion to persist. So when you see me, and you see me doing something big, you have to ask yourself, why is Adam in that position? When you see a black pilot, you have to see his race, right? He's not just a pilot, he's a black pilot. Remember that, with a capital B. Make sure you put a capital B on it. So that's what truly racially aware people do. Don't be a sucker. Stop falling for the trap. You're better than that. Peace.